Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And with me today, I have two of the co-founders of the Cloud Connectors, Pierre Rousseau and Jeff Tremblay. Welcome to you both.
Pleasure
Thank
being
you,
here.
Brent. Pleasure
Yeah,
being here.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm really excited about today's conversation. We're going to be talking about integration in the cloud, how it's not like it used to be. Um, and there's a lot to think about. We've all had some conversations offline, the three of us and others on your team. Have learned a lot about this over the past several months. We're actually coming out with a research report not too many weeks, and it should be live soon. And but we wanted to just give people an opportunity to sort of see this from your perspective. I know we have an iceberg here on the screen, Jeff. I can already kind of imagine the metaphor here. I'm thinking of the Titanic and what happened there. Um, what's going on here with integration today?
Yeah, so what we're trying to represent here is the kind of the problem of integration and how, especially in the enterprise world, where even though technically, yes, you can create integration and yes, you can adapt it for customers, but what happens over time is trying to standardize this if you with the traditional approach is vendors create this iceberg. If they're trying to customize every customer's, what they end up with is every customer has its line of code. As you deploy and multiply customers in the cloud, you end up with this iceberg, and the portion that you see is an integration offering in APIs, and it looks all nice, but under the hood is as you've deployed and implemented so many of them, you end up with what you don't see, which is, one line of code per customers. And if anything, if you need to move the icebergs and API change, something happened in the environment where you need to change for everybody, well, you have to move what's underneath, basically. So this is what we're trying to represent here.
Yeah, that's pretty. And that iceberg does look pretty nice for an iceberg above the water anyway. But yeah, there's it looks pretty ugly underneath. It can be tough. You mentioned sort of the APIs and all of that. I understand that. So just people who are watching, a lot of folks that may have dealt with this in the past, and when they're dealing with vendors in the space and having to sort of connect to different systems. We hear about point-to-point API connections, these sorts of things, and sort of I like to call it a one and done approach to integration that happens at the beginning, and there's a lot that can go wrong there. Can you maybe share with us a little bit around that?
Yeah, for sure. First there's kind of a myth with integration. It's been a problem for so long, probably for over 20 years or so, or as long as I've been in the industry, at least, it was a problem. And the problem definitely evolved from being the pure basic of being able to exchange data, right? If you go back like 20 years ago, before APIs, to exchange data, you had secure file transfer server and you were doing this from file, but really any integration had to occur in parallel in this parallel world of what the evolution of the stack of the or the product were evolving. So you had direct SQL injections, or you were consuming flat file and injected in your system and or exporting. So for integration, you were using reporting to export basically, and then like bulk import and before APIs happened. So it was impossible to evolve product with at the same time as integration offering. So that was kind of the old way, and it was ugly. And then when API occurred, everybody says that is it, and there was kind of a lot of publicity to say the integration problem has been solved and we're done with it. And that's now we can exchange data and it's done, so it's solved. So people said, finally, let's talk about something else. Reality is, even today, it's still the number one problem in the HR tech industry. For when you try to build your stack, it's still not solved. So why is it not solved? And it's we try to usually I try to explain this through SQL, right? That's the same thing as exchanging database. So you have system, which each have data model, and they each have their API offering, and sometimes just changing one field in the integration. Say, I've customized my application. Here's my user-defined field. Just add that to that integration. That's simple enough, but for that might be a different API call, right? So that's
Mm.
problem one. So that's how you end up with this custom code for the specific customer. Plus the on top of that, even though it can mean one more API, but also is between each of the integration is ETL, right? Extract, transform, and load. Because
Mhm.
there's no language, that simple field that you're trying to change can have an impact on extracting it, a different API call. Now you need to transform it for your destination system. So I need to transform. And even though I'm adding an extra field, I need to add code to transform it. Plus, finally, send it to the destination might have an impact. So you have any changes have impacts along the way that can apply and create, this multiple effect. And then that's kind of how you build your iceberg. So I hope that was clear, but that's in a nutshell, that's kind of the problem that we're trying to solve and how iceberg keeps getting built.
Mm.
It's just why right now, as in the enterprise world, as soon as you try to adjust your integration for each customers, sometimes it can have it's just
And
long impacts.
and the iceberg doesn't melt as you add clients. It just grows and grows and grows, right? So it's
I'm so glad you brought that up here because I was just thinking something like I don't know if you read my mind or I read yours, but whichever way, it's good because I was thinking about because as you were talking, Jeff, I was thinking, okay, how does I'm starting to think about icebergs, like actual icebergs, and how they get bigger and bigger, and they just keep accumulating, frozen water. The water just keeps freezing underneath and that every single API connection that an organization takes on is another sort of frozen layer, making the iceberg even bigger. And when you're describing sort of the old way of making a connection work, right? That it was almost exhausting to think about, right? Because there's so much that needs to go right. There's so much that just has to be, you have to babysit
Yeah.
along the way, and it can be. I imagine it can just be absolutely. An absolute nightmare for some organizations if they have a particularly busy HCM technology stacks. Now I know you both are ex-Taleo. And I'd love to hear the story because a little birdie told me that this was kind of like your origins, where this is your aha moment, where you really thought, okay, yes, this is what needs to get done.
yes, definitely. So first of all, you're spot on. Yes, we're from Taleo, and I was from the services side, and Jeff was from product, and we were both working in a great organization that had hundreds of thousands of customers. The problem being that I felt at that point, I always felt, why are we only caring about our side of the fence, right? We didn't
Hmm.
know what the other softwares were doing, which HRIS and so on and so forth. We only cared about what Taleo needed, right? So there was this wall, and then we were on this side of the fence, and we were just looking at the Taleo integrations, and the very few that ever happened to we knew what was happening on the other side. It was just like kind of magic, right? So
Hmm.
that led to our vision when we started Cloud Connectors. We said, no, we're not going to be caring about our side of the fence. We're going to be looking at the vast realm of HR, and it's better to see it from end to end. And that was vision since day one. So build a software that's going to be able to address all of these problems and A to Z, right? And so you have a unified way of looking at the transactions, and you see it from end to end. So that was a vision since day one,
Hmm.
and that was based on, yes, great Taleo experience, but not optimal, and that's where we came in, and that's where we are today.
For
Yeah,
sure.
yes. Um, this might be a good segue because there's, from what I understand, that was sort of the impetus for this development of a easily accessible, understandable language for API integration, cloud data, which you guys have invented. Um, Now, there's a really good analogy that you guys do a much better job of describing than I do, with sort of SQL, and how SQL was a godsend back in the day for spreadsheet integration.
Yeah, so and Pierre described it well. So, definitely back in the day, each vendor, and I guess that's still true today. I mean, most vendors try to solve integration by looking at their own little RAM and create offerings based on who. So, and that's still what's happening today. So you have vendor and you create solution that you try to create little bubbles to isolate your problem and say, okay, I'm trying to solve assessments, background check, and here's my offering with some flexibility and all that, which that's a topic for another time, I guess, or how to solve this. But how even at Teleo, we definitely lived it where the product evolved by acquisition of Oracle, tried to grow from a more recruiting into a fuel talent management space. The product evolved, integration offering had to evolve, and we had to migrate customers from old kind of systems to the other, and it was such an impact. So definitely when we founded the Cloud Connectors, okay, we want to solve the problem from A to Z, plus let's try to solve it kind of, what's missing in integration, what is missing to make this a flexible, so I don't try to solve it like the industry tries to solve it right now, which is, okay, I'm going to look at one problem and I'm going to solve that problem, then the next problem, I'll solve the next problem when it comes. We try to say, okay, can we solve this, and what was missing, what's missing? And again, I referred to it previously, it's the ETL approach to say,
Yeah.
okay, and if you think at SQL, I can write the database problem is the same as integration problem, or very similar, and familiar with that. I'm trying to move data from sources to destination, which is different schema, different structure of data. But I'm still trying to move data, and I can write a statement that says in SQL, which is select from these sources, transform it, and move. So that can be written into one single statement that in and the language is standardized. So basically, whatever is the problem of data, you don't actually try to look at one problem bubble at bubble. You're just saying, here's, I'm expressing a data statement, and then it can be interpreted and generated. So moving data from databases is no longer a problem. That was missing in integration. There's no integration language. So that's kind of so you do have API, which are your sources similar to databases. In a nutshell, it's fronting your application, but there's no language to represent, I want to move from these API to this, and I want to transform it. So integration is still done in silos. Extraction, transformation, and load is entirely different. So every time you have a new data problem, you have to write code. So that's what we try to solve, to say, okay, now first, let's create a platform, and I pass around a language that is solving that, so that doesn't matter what data statement or what data problem we can add, it's always going to be solved the same way. In a nutshell, that's just what we try to do.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up iPaaS, because the cloud connectors, TCC for short, the cloud connectors is an iPaaS, but you're different. You're a different kind of iPaaS, and it is that cloud data piece of the puzzle that's a big part of that. Yeah, yeah. You know, I'd love to learn a little bit more around integration strategy. We talk about that too, but I know there's also another slide here that's really interesting I've seen before. So the wall effect. Yeah. We've heard it. I've heard you guys calling it the wall effect. Pierre, what is the wall effect?
So basically, when you are you're a startup, right? And you first start signing customers, and you need to build custom integrations, and of course you can do it, right? You got some very bright minds in your shop, and those guys are going to take care of it. So you're going to have one guy that's going to do it, and then he's going to build a second customer through another software, and so on and so forth, right? So you got your own team, maybe one or two guys that are going to build these integrations to 1, 2, 3, 5, 20 customers. But as you grow, you keep replicating the same thing, which is custom code per client. And now your team, well, it's no longer 1 or 2 guys. Now we're 4 or 5 guys, right? And you keep growing, you keep expanding. And now you're at a point where you got 200 integrations, 300 integrations. And now you're 7 guys. And now you got customers asking you to change code X and Y and Z. And it becomes a lot of work. And now you're at some point, it's going to cost you, internal cost is going to be through the roof. But in your own mindset, you're going to say, well, guess what? I have to do it. It's the way to go, right? But no, it's not the way to go. And we like to think that your own developers should be working on building your own solution and enhancing it and come up with very cool features, not have 5 or 10 guys, or maybe more in some cases, that are just maintaining lines of codes, integrations. That's just not, that to us, it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
right? So that's a wall effect.
There's
Go ahead.
many, the vendors tend to think, and that's what we try to represent. They tend to think that they can solve this, and they don't really see the long-term big picture of where they're going. So as Pierre saying, the first instinct is like, oh, there's an API. Yeah, I can build something that works. And then, so the first misconception is they'll think that eventually, if they do it, they'll be able to repeat per vendor, or it'll look the same, or adjustments per system that they try to grow. It's gonna slightly vary, but they can simplify quite a bit. And then the second mistake is thinking that even once they realize that it doesn't work per vendor or much, then they'll think, well, okay, well, at least once I have a vendor, I'll be able to customize, or each customer will fit in the same bucket. But unless you simplify to the exact same requirements per customers, you end up with this, and then you'll hit your wall at one point where I think Gartner now says that it's 50% of your R&D that will be spent on integration for your own product over time, and it keeps they keep
growing,
augmenting that number every year, every time they do their new report. Yeah, it's like 50, and I think they're predicting that it will grow beyond 50 in the future because of that problem.
50.
Yes, 50. Correct. Yeah.
It's funny. I can imagine a scenario where a vendor, contending with all of these integrations might actually be preferable not to take on new customers at some point. It's a weird kind of situation to think about, but this is so interesting because if you think about it, this is sort of the sum total effect, financial labor expenditure effect, and innovation impediment for any vendor that has that big iceberg underneath the surface of the integration. That this is what happens with the integration iceberg. This is what happens. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're tied. They're directly tied, both of them. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what does an integration strategy look like? Let me frame this a little bit from my perch, from what I understand, and maybe you guys can elaborate. From what I understand, again, going back to the APIs and that point-to-point API integration approach of the past, which was definitely better than what preceded that, but just isn't up to snuff for today. When you have enough of those in place, it's just you're very reactive, and it's kind of like trying to plug the holes in a dam, and you only have so many fingers, and you're just working on that. An integration strategy. What is an integration strategy? Like, how does cloud data factor into that? Because obviously it does, but there's more to it than that. What is an integration strategy?
Well, the integration strategy, first of all, is it has to be 3 to 5 years upfront, right? So what do you need to put in place right now for everything to scale once you are 5, 10, 20 times bigger, 100 times bigger, right? So that's the first thing you need to think about. So the strategy should come from you your organization and not come, and it typically comes from sales, right? Sales are going to say, hey guys, I'm about to sign this customer, can you integrate these guys? And you're going to say, sure, we'll make it happen, right? And that's not strategy, that's just being reactive, and that's what many people do. But the strategy is otherwise. You first of all need to select the right iPaaS, right? That is going to be able to scale with the number of clients that you add, and scalability is number one. Afterwards, you've got to be able to mass manage and mass update, because your own APIs might vary, might change over the years, and of course the different softwares that you're going to be connecting to will evolve as well. So you got to be able to scale, mass manage, and that's what you need to, that's what needs to be part of your strategy. Otherwise, every single client is going to have his own line of code, and you're going to have to redo this over and over again.
Yeah, I would say reusability from A to Z. You need to reuse your code and be sure that, as Pierre's saying, mass update. And that's kind of, for us, like if you think about it, if you reduce your integration to data statement, like for us, we could have a vendor changing his API. It could change from XML to JSON. If the data model is the same or evolves, as long as it's the same piece of data, we can update a connector and we consume a data statement. It'll just generate the proper web services. So we update once and mass update for everybody. That needs to be, and then ultimately think about your long-term maintenance costs. So if you think about integration, think about long-term and maintenance costs. And if your strategy is going to keep, is going to bring you to 50 or 60% of your R&D spent on integration, how can you stay competitive, and how can customer not have to absorb that cost in the long term, right?
Yeah. Going back to what you said, Pierre, that what strikes me here is that I would say an integration strategy, first and foremost, is just a wholesale shift in mindset. Where you
starts with a mindset shift. You're right. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you're realizing from the very, it's the organizations that are going to get this right they're going to be working with the cloud connectors, obviously, but beyond that, they're going to have that understanding that they're thinking about the future. You said the 3 to 5 year mindset, where they are acknowledging, it's almost a sort of a talking turkey to themselves. Look, we are going to hit the wall, the integration wall effect. It is going to affect us. Unless we account for that now and entirely shift our approach to integration. One of the things that I like to talk about is when thinking about integration, a lot of it coming from my conversations with you two, is this idea of Zen. There's so many things we think about. Okay, at some point we're going to solve for it finally, and they'll be perfect, and we can set it and forget it and move on. There's a book that I know I haven't read the whole book, so I don't want to be a poser here. I haven't actually read the book, but it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I started reading it once, and I got super busy with something, and I put it down, and I never finished it. But what I understand is that you have an old motorcycle, right? You're not, the goal is not to get it fixed and get it right, and then you're never going to have to fix it again to enjoy it. The idea is that you need to incorporate repairing the motorcycle into your long-term never-ending experience for as long as you have the motorcycle. And that's kind of the idea with integration strategy as well. I think you're not going into your integration at the beginning and looking to fix it at the outset and then expecting it just to work. The idea is to think about integration throughout the lifetime of the coexistence of those applications.
For sure. I love that analogy because I'm a motorcycle enthusiast. Plus,
oh, yeah.
I love IT.
I didn't know.
But I think you're right. it's spot on, because you cannot look at integration as a fixed. You'll never. It will always change. I mean, we're in the IT world. There's so many, especially in HR. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many new solutions. People are being creative, and there's always new application, new solution. You want to integrate them into your stack, so it will continuously evolve. And then even the same systems evolve, technology evolves, APIs change, the system change. So I love the analogy. If you can figure out how to maintain it over time and as part of your life cycle, it's perfect. That's the way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for being my guests on this episode. I think this is very, very helpful for folks to be learning about in our space.
Thank you so much, Brent.
Thanks to you, Brent.